Yeah, you know how this came about was because I was talking to a mutual friend, uh, our publisher, Joseph Alexander, at
Mm,
Fundamental Changes, because I believe you've written a book for them.
I
Is it
have,
just one
yeah.
book? Sorry.
Just recently released the first book with them. Actually released it last month in January.
Great.
Really
What's
enjoyed
that
the
called?
process. It was good fun. It's called Expressive Fingerstyle Guitar
Is
Technique.
it more of a technical book, obviously?
Yeah, so it's a series of exercises and study pieces which are designed around the idea of trying to build a little bit more expression into your playing as a fingerstyle guitarist.
Yeah.
It's kind of coming a little bit from my classical roots, I suppose, and a lot of picking hand expression, really,
Yeah.
which I often find that on the steel string guitar, it's discussed in slightly different ways, it's approached in different ways, but I think the classical world can kind of inform that a little bit, and vice versa. And the book is trying to do a little bit of that, just so that people can have a few of the tools to just get the most music out of their playing.
Because I know on the rare occasions that I do play nylon string, and I've recorded a couple of albums on nylon string, just have to play so completely differently. Have to
Mm.
phrase things in a different way. Things that work so well on steel string just don't work at all on nylon string. And of course, everything
Absolutely.
in what we do, everything's in the right hand, isn't it?
It
And
is. I agree. Yeah.
it always makes me laugh when a guitar player. Very often, guitar players are very experienced. They'll say to me, "How did you do that?" And they're sitting in front of me and they're looking at my left hand. I said, "Don't look at that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's only pressing the notes down. It's all in here, isn't it?"
Yeah, exactly, and it's often. I just think it's often, glossed over. The importance, and also, I really believe that the picking hand is where musician comes from, and that's where the kind of unique sound and
Exactly.
that kind of trademark stamp that makes someone's playing recognizable instantly comes from the picking
Yeah.
hand and how you interact with the strings. So,
I
yeah,
always
I'm with you.
say that's where the music happens.
Yeah, yeah, couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. And the book is really designed around the conversations that I've had with students over many years, whether it be in workshops or tutorials or whatever it might be, and it just quite often just ends up falling back into similar talking points. And I thought, well, it's about time I got these ideas on the page. So it was lovely to work with the guys at Fundamental Changes for that.
Oh wow, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Wow,
That was the
you've
botanist.
captured the mood. You know, obviously we're not seeing the moving images that was written for, but you're creating those in our minds. It's
I suppose it was probably around my kind of mid-teens, maybe 15 or 16, when I first started writing my own music. And that was a little bit of a sea change for me. That kind of just something flipped in my head where the guitar became so much more to me. I enjoyed learning classical and going through all of that, but I never felt a tremendous sense of ownership over it. It was always I was learning other people's music and other people's ways, and of course, you can put your stamp on it. Of course, you can, but so something about composition that just kind of that was where I would lose entire days to playing. It just time and guitar would just it was just one thing. It was the one thing I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And that was it. I kind of did a bit of classical and the composition kind of alongside one another. Started playing more steel string alongside the nylon string and kind of developed from there, really.
What what music were you really drawn to from the beginning, or was it very broad?
It was fairly broad, I think. I mean, there was a few pivotal moments, musical moments, I suppose, which kind of changed the course of where I was going. Before I started writing my own music and started on the steel string, I was getting quite into blues, like just slow hand Stevie Ray Vaughan stuff. I was really enjoying that. Felt quite liberating after the classical stuff. But then I tell you what it was actually. It was a concert by the Italian acoustic guitarist called Antonio Forcioni.
I know Antonio. Yes.
Yeah. So I saw him when I was about 14, 15 for the first time. And that was the first time I'd seen the acoustic guitar played in ways that I'd never seen it being played before. He would swap between steel string and nylon string. He'd play music inspired by all around the world with amazing musicians on stage with him. Use extended techniques, percussive techniques. And just incredibly expressive. And I was just blown away by it. And it was that moment I was like, I wonder if I could do something myself and create a sound that was kind of my own, like Antonio has. And that's kind of what sparked this kind of little composition journey for me. Diving into his world.
It's very interesting that you had that classical training right from the beginning, but then were drawn to writing your own music, composing your own music, because one of the criticisms of classical training, not just for the guitar but other instruments as well, is that sometimes it can be so strict that it can stifle the musician.
Yeah.
And I've heard classical musicians actually say that to me themselves. I wish I hadn't done that. But I just got stuck into this thing and I just can't break out of it. But you did that at a very young age.
Yeah, I think I benefited from having a guitar teacher who was very encouraging towards finding, my own sound or like exploring new ideas. He was never, this has to be done this way. He was always very giving and also said like, oh, you need to go and have lessons with other people. It shouldn't just be with me. All that kind of stuff, which I think was quite nice. He wasn't trying to create a miniature version of him. He wasn't trying to kind of guide me down like a very strict classical path, and as a result, I felt like I had the freedom to kind of explore what I wanted to explore. And yeah, I agree with a lot of your sentiments about the classical world. And for many years, it did seem like it was camp classical and camp acoustic, and there wasn't a huge amount of communication between the two. Yeah. But nowadays, there's way more crossover, and I find myself happiest taking a bit of both, and trying to bring those worlds together, because the classical realm can learn so much from acoustic and jazz and everything else, of course, and vice versa. I think it's just, there's a lot to be had from all of those ways of thinking about the instrument, I think.
Did you have an affinity with improvising just spontaneously, or were you working more on your compositions?
Well, that's an interesting point, because I think that's where I had to struggle away from my classical side a little bit when it came to improvisation. I mean, it was funny how I didn't. When I first started, I didn't see composition as improvisation, but of course, there's a lot of kind of crossover there in the way that you create.
Yeah.
But for me, I had this kind of I had these hang-ups left over from my classical days, where
that's what I was talking about.
But no, exactly, absolutely. I genuinely I had to work on them. I really, really did have to work on them, because I was in that kind of situation where you put a piece of paper in front of me, and I'm a happy man. I'll play that, sure.
I run a mile.
Yeah, there we go. Isn't that fun? It's fascinating, isn't it? It's just like it's completely two sides to it, isn't there?
Yeah.
So then you take the page away, and I was like, ooh, this is a bit scary, blank canvas kind of vibes, But then you start realizing, if you start looking at things in a slightly different way, I should say, like actually the classical kind of pathway and the knowledge you gain from it can actually be very, very helpful if it's framed in a good way for improvisation. And I was like, actually, I've learned my scales very diligently, but I've never been taught what they're for. I've learnt them and I've repeated them back to a bloke behind a table in an exam room, and I've never actually used them beyond that. And I was like, this gives me a little bit of a foot in the door, both for improvisation and composition. And then I was like, okay, well maybe actually I probably know a little bit more about this stuff than I'm giving myself credit for. I just need to look at it through a different lens. So that really helped. And I often have conversations with students along those lines. It might be, I don't pick another topic, it could be something like theory, and people are going to go, oh, theory, that's a scary word. But actually, people end up knowing a load more theory than they give themselves credit for, but they're just not thinking of it in that way, And then when you start picking it apart, it's like, oh, I do know a bit, actually, yeah, I do. So that was my experience, kind of breaking a little bit away from that kind of classical hang-up that I had. And then getting a bit more comfortable with improvisation. And now, I tend to try. I can't remember who told me this, but someone said to me years ago, every time you pick up your guitar, you should try and do something you've never done before. And that's kind of stuck with me. And I've kind of used improvisation off the back of that. It won't necessarily be in any particular style. It will just be an exploration. I kind of just, something just to get me connected with the instrument, I suppose.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Something else to build up a kind of improvising vocabulary.
Exactly that.
Is to steal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really, everyone does it. They might not want to admit it, but you hear things that you like. Other players play things. Oh, that's with me. I stole mostly from other instrumentalists, so it's not necessarily quite so obvious when I play it on the guitar. But a lot of like saxophone players and a lot of piano players that I did. I was going to ask you how everyone can keep in touch with you and what you're doing. So that's at your website.
Yeah, my website's probably the best place. Obviously, all the usual social media gubbins, depending on what people are on, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, all of that. But yeah, my website's pretty solid for kind of finding out more, exploring my music more.
It's a very good, clean site. I like it.
Oh, thank you very much. Lots of stuff on there if you're interested in checking out a little bit more of my work. This is a tune of mine called The Wake Up, which is inspired by kind of where I live at the moment, down on the south coast of England. I've got some beautiful coastline around here, and it's kind of describing the coastline as it wakes up in the morning and comes alive. So I hope you enjoy this.
Thank you, Will. That was really beautiful.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much for
I keep
listening.
saying that
Really
beautiful,
appreciate
but everything is beautiful.
it. Good. Well, I'm happy
Everyone's
about
playing
that.
so beautifully.
Marvelous.
Thanks, Will.
Thank you.